Welcome to the Empowered Team podcast. I'm so excited to be here with Steven Gaffney. So this is a rare opportunity where we have somebody who is as experienced as you are in leadership, and not only leadership, but teaching leadership. We're talking not only being the CEO of your company, the Steven Gaffney Company, but the 30 plus years that you've had advising top executives, working with Fortune 500 companies, major associations, 35 organizations that are ranked number 1 or 2 in their industries. Your list goes on and on, especially now you are an author of a book called Unconditional Power, Thriving in Any Situation. You've got also some really cool technology that I'm going to ask you about later. Tell me a little bit more about what you really do in your career in the past and your current day to day.
Well, what we do mainly is we make leadership teams great, because my philosophy, the company's philosophy, is if you make the leadership team great, you make the organization great. And it sounds so obvious, but I've had people will call me and say, listen, I know you do team stuff, but we really have problems with our mid-level management. And my comeback is, well, who's in charge of the mid-level management? Yeah. And they go, oh yeah, it's a good point.
Wait a second. So I have a question for you on that.
Yeah.
Let's say if we're going into teams right off the bat, let's say there's a CEO and let's say there's a board, and that CEO has a leadership team, and their leadership team is overseeing different departments of the company. When you're talking teams, where sometimes those department leaders and their different departments are really the team, right? You've got team, all these different departments. Is the CEO someone, do you think, in your opinion and your experience, someone who should stay very separate from all of those separate teams and only deal with the leadership team? Or should that CEO have some sort of presence permeating into the departments, into the middle management? What does that look like to you? Your opinion?
Well, it's a complex answer, because first of all, if we were to prioritize, the number one best use of a leadership or CEO's time is their own leadership team. Yeah. Because if you get that leadership team correct, then it should theoretically and often impact the rest of the organization. Having said that, they can't just sit there isolated. And we do a lot of work on creating what I call consistently high achieving teams, which is different than high performing teams, which we can talk about. But essentially, there's 12 essential elements of a consistently high achieving team. Essentially, think of 12 tools. One of them is have a consistent communication business rhythm, in which there are different types of meetings, and one of the types is having an all hands and skip level meetings, which means as a CEO or any leader of any organization, you can't just sit with your own leadership team. You do need to skip levels to hear how the messages are going, and as well as all hands, so people hear directly from you to the entire workforce and vice versa. I'm out of the United States, and the president of whether Republican or Democrat, that's not a political conversation, but every president that's ever been is always had State of the Union, and also sometimes speaks direct to the American public, just like I imagine with most countries, right? The value is that when there's a very important message, we want to make sure it's direct. So yes, the top leadership team, but we can't just sit there and not operate as if there's not other teams that need to hear from us.
Excellent. I love hearing your perspective on that, because there are different ways that leaders approach that kind of situation. So before we go further, I'm so excited to pick your brain here. How did you get into your field? How did you get to building your company and leading and teaching? How did this come about for you?
Well, I originally started many, many years ago with working with photographers and commercial directors, but bottom line is helping them with communication and motivation. I had an agency, and bottom line, I just said bottom line twice, but anyway, the key is that out of that, I started to do sessions for them, which actually led ultimately to the corporate world, because a graphic designer who sat in one of my sessions said to her husband, hey, you should bring this guy in. And he happened to work for IBM. And that's how that whole thing started. Because as you know, being in this, the field together, is if you can help somebody and you produce results, they're going to recommend you to other people. So I actually come from the business side, and that's how I started. And then I started with honest communication, developing a formula on how to have difficult conversations, which ultimately led to building great teams. So that's like a very, very short version of how I got here.
I love it. I love it. And you've just built and built and built upon experience and referrals, and on it goes. Speak to that honest communication and difficult conversations, because those two things, that it can be unpacked ad nauseum. It's something that is
Absolutely.
so important. So whichever one you want to start with, tell us more about your perspectives and your teachings on those topics.
Great question. So, and great subject to cover, because you're right. We can unpack this and talk for hours, because it is the most important skill set. Because when it's all said and done, whether we're talking about teams, organizations, or whatever, it's all about having great relationships. Well, the ability to have great relationships is having difficult conversations. And how do you do that? So there's there's a 9-step formula I developed years ago that ended up saving people's marriage, got people promoted. CEOs are able to do incredible stuff. So we can definitely unpack that. But here's what I will say if they don't listen to anything else out of what we're talking about. The most important thing is to make sure there's honest communication. But what I mean by honest communication is not about truth or lies. The biggest problem is not what people say. It's actually what they don't say to each other. It's what they leave out. There's way too much worry about tone, body language, and all this other stuff that's, I'm not saying is not important, but the most important skill set is how do you get other people to speak the truth? And how do we get to tell other people our real truth and have it go well so we resolve this situation? Because we can also get the unsaid said. And sometimes people say that they're doing that, but they're really blaming other people and nothing moves forward. It's getting the unsaid said and then resolving issues, which is the most important message to take away from today's podcast and what to do in people's life day in and day out.
Oh, this is so good. Okay. So let's just pause here, because this is such a powerful nugget. It's in this honest communication. It's what they leave out. What they leave out. What is it that they're tending to leave out? If you had to categorize the most of the time, what are people leaving out when they're, they think they're honest people, they think they're in integrity and they've got great values and everything, but then they go and have a conversation. They're trying to be as honest as they can, but really, and someone else knows that they're leaving some things out. What do they tend to leave out the most?
Well, they leave out a lot of things. So there's not so much one area. It's just that they leave out things. So let's make this clear. This is not about other people only. It's about all of us. We all leave out things. And let me explain biologically to prove the point. The average person thinks about 600 to 1200 plus words per minute. We're not sure, but we think significantly faster than what we speak at. In other words, the top speed that most people ever reach would be 200 words per minute. So let's say and I speak pretty fast. If I speak 200 words per minute, but let's say I'm a slow thinker at 600 words per minute, that means I'm already adding out 400 words per minute of what I'm thinking versus what I'm saying. So the reality is we're all editing, but
Yeah.
the problem is when we edit things that really would be valuable for the other person to hear. So let's look at what stops us from speaking the truth of what people really need to hear, and that's fear. Fear of retribution, fear it's going to come out wrong, fear that the other person is never going to forget what we say, right? And fear of risk. People often want to say things to their boss, peers, or maybe even employees, but we're afraid that, my gosh, if it comes out wrong, this could hurt me in my career. So fear is the number one thing, which actually gives us the solution, which is create safety, emotional safety, not psychological safety. We can talk about that. I'm talking about create emotional safety. If we make people feel safe, they'll speak the truth. And if we feel safe, emotionally safe, we'll speak the truth.
Yay, this is so good. So you answered the second question that I was going to ask, which was, if we've got this biological situation where, of course, we're going to filter down what we're actually thinking, because we can only get so much across. So we have to make sure that it's careful as to what we get across. But then if we're really not saying what needs to be said because of fear, then the next question I was going to ask, well, how do we get that unsaid said? And you've really wrapped it up so nicely in that emotional safety. Tell me how you tend to differentiate for people emotional safety and psychological safety. How do you differentiate those two when you're teaching to a group? Because for many leaders, they're going to go, okay, we're going to have some psychological safety here because that's what HR said. And okay, I've done that. Everybody's safe. Nobody's worried that, they're going to lose their job, even though they secretly are. What differentiate between psychological safety and emotional safety?
Great question. I love talking about this because all that's out there, or mainly what's out there, is psychological safety, and it misses the point. And this is based on 30 years of experience working with people at all levels. People can psychologically get that it's going to be safe. They may think, even rational mind, well, I'm not going to lose my job, and my boss will understand, or my peers will understand, or my employees will understand, or people at home. They can rationally think, but here's the thing: human beings are emotional. They're not necessarily always rational. And people actually make decisions based on emotions, not on logic. I'm not saying logic is not important. We need to, and we could talk about this, how emotions make people move, and logic sustains it. But where I'm headed with this is, we have to feel safe. So cognitively, we can get, probably nothing bad's going to happen. But it's my feeling inside. Do I feel safe? So what's an example? And the opposite, where somebody makes us not feel safe. Have you ever had somebody say, listen, you can tell me that anything that's on your mind. I really was expecting honesty. And then you say, well, okay, let me give you some constructive criticism, or let me say what's on. And then they lose their mind. They lose it. And you're like, oh, I'm not going there. In fact, what's so interesting is people train and condition people to lie to them. And I
Yeah.
often say to people, aren't there people in your life right now that you go, oh, I'm not going there? Because of their reaction, they have trained you and I to lie to them. People say it's a heavy word, but let's speak the truth. That's what happens. We don't say certain things because we know that person's going to react. And as a result, we keep quiet and everybody loses.
Yes, yes, yes. And it's that adage that we teach people how to treat us. We teach people how to treat us. So our responses then are teaching them that, oh, it's scary. I feel afraid. I feel judged. I feel uncertain when they react this way. And it probably stems back to, oh, it reminds me of my mother or my father or somebody in my family when I was scared as a little kid, of how they reacted or how they responded. And then that's being brought into the workplace unknowingly, but we're going to protect ourselves emotionally, because that tends to drive our actions, or in this case, our inactions. It's driving our inaction due to being afraid of what could happen. Really, really powerful.
Well, thank you. And this touches on what I think is the most important leadership trait, and that is the ability to create emotional safety. People say, why is that the number one? I'll say, let me explain it very quickly. If we don't create emotional safety, in other words, people are afraid and they don't speak the truth, as a leader, as a CEO, or whatever you're leading, whoever you're leading, you have to get every decision right, because people are not going to speak the truth. But let's say we're not the best visionary. If we create that emotional safety, people say, my gosh, what's the vision? I'm lost here. But if I create fear, nobody's going to say it. Or let's say we're not the best at operations, right? That's just not our strength. If we create fear, we got to make every decision correct, because nobody's going to tell us the truth. But if we're not really great at operations and we create that emotional safety, people give us feedback. They'll even share ideas. So really, when you look at it, our ability to create emotional safety is the most important leadership skill out there. And yet, most of the books talk about visionary and all these other stuff that I'm not saying is not important, but the most important thing is create emotional safety.
So give us a few steps as to how leaders can start to practice, because I'm guessing here that it's going to be over time, it's going to be a practice, it's going to have to develop some trust perhaps. So how can leaders, what are a few steps that leaders can do to develop this trait of being able to create emotional safety?
Well, there are many, many techniques, which we'll get to. But let me just say this right off the bat. The first one is clean up messes, right? So if you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, I've kind of reacted to people at home and yeah, my boss, or I didn't really like that feedback. And, some people are like, well, I haven't gotten really reacted strongly. But really, like, how about people who eyes roll or they stop paying attention and they start to text? That's another form of disrespect, which actually shuts people down. But sometimes people just say, oh my gosh, I have reacted. Well, if you have, clean up the messes. And one of the best things to do is apologize straight out. Not, I'm sorry, I reacted that way, but you made me. That doesn't work. It's like, hey, I'm sorry. I reacted the other day and I shouldn't. I imagine that it makes you not want to speak the truth, and I'm going to do better moving forward, and I'm sorry. So clean up messes. That's one thing. There are many other techniques, and I'll give you 3 other ones. Second would be ask great questions. Ask great questions. Prime the pump with open-ended questions. So ask people open-ended questions. There's a difference between saying, don't you like this versus what do you think about this? How is this landing with you? Give me some feedback on what you're thinking. What are some ideas that you have? Open-ended questions. You want to prime the pump to have people share things. So first, clean up messes. Second, ask questions. Third is create that emotional safety. And not only with us, right, watch our reaction, but as leaders, we have to watch how other people react to other people. If I'm leading a team and somebody is getting defensive with someone else and I say, well, they're so talented, I can deal with them. The question is, can others? So
Yeah.
create that emotional safety. And the fourth is reward honesty. My gosh, how many times have you heard people ask for feedback or do employee surveys or customer surveys, and they don't do anything with that information? Or at best, they just report back what they learned instead of saying, this is the actions we're going to take. So we have to do something with the feedback. We have to reward people and say, hey, thanks for the feedback. As a result, we are now doing this, this, and this. Reward feedback.
That's amazing. I can think of 2 companies that I've worked with that was the catalyst for me coming in, was some sort of company survey. And that company survey had them go, there's some things we're really missing here. And they had no idea. And
Yeah.
when they bring someone in to help them with culture or leadership or trainings or workshops or whatever I happen to be helping them with at the time. So these are really, really great. Now, I can't help but think as I'm listening to this, because this podcast goes out to men and women, and we see all kinds of the interactions that happen with leaders and sometimes their personal lives. This sounds like advice that would go to a marriage. This is, I'm looking at this going, I can think of my own marriage, other people's marriage. I can see this helping marriages. Where this sounds like a very high connected, high performance human thing. I know we're in the context of looking at leadership and potentially companies or businesses, but this sounds like just a high performing human thing in order to help other people have their best performance as humans working with other humans. What are your thoughts on that?
I think you're spot on. And I've seen this time and time again. And here's my proof of what you're saying. When I'm doing seminars on a big scale, so a lot we do work with obviously the leadership teams, but we also teach this stuff and do big audiences and teach a lot of these skills. I'll have people choose the most difficult, challenging person they have in their life. And then my goal and my team's goal and other trainers that I've trained is to have them walk through exactly what to do. So when they're finished with the session, they just haven't thought, oh, these are nice concepts. They see how to apply it on the most difficult person in their life. Well, we give them as an option, even though we're hired there for business most of the time. We say, but choose any example. What's fascinating is when you ask people, they often choose home life examples. Why?
Yeah.
Because it's really troubling for people. I've had people take these strategies and save their marriage, save teenage situations. Let me give you an example of what I mean and how it really does cross over. A client of mine took one of the principles, and first of all, his big complaint in the session was, these are great, but it would never work on my teenager. She doesn't talk to me at all. But then we covered about how this concept of deep listening and not reacting, and he
Yeah.
realized he did more transmitting than he did receiving. So he, as a result, he went back to his teenage daughter, apologized, and actually started to ask her questions. And no matter what she said, he worked on not reacting. And just to probe further and appreciate her and other strategies that we've covered in this session, it completely turned around his relationship with his teenager. He went from having a horrible relationship to a fantastic relationship. And what he primarily did was the concept of deep listening, reinforcement, and appreciation, all of which we cover. And some of these principles, somebody might say, well, that sounds obvious. No, it's not, because there's a way to really listen to somebody beyond the words and how to appreciate and how to reinforce. But the point being is, people often will choose a personal life. And that's why I'm so passionate about this, because although we're hired there for work, people use it at home. And I'm glad, because there is no difference between business and personal communication. It is all the same. It's just how you apply it may be different, and the words we use is different. But it's a universal human condition, having challenging relationships and how to improve that.
I love that. And the deep listening, the reinforcement, and the appreciation really point to people and their need to be seen,
Yeah.
whether it's in their need to be seen in sort of a admiration kind of standpoint, or whatever that looks like, and knowing how that person needs to be seen. So this leads to my next curiosity, which is that, how about for those leaders profiling their team? Because it's one thing if we all know that humans need to be seen, they need to be acknowledged, but this person likes to be acknowledged this way, and this person likes to be seen that way because they're different. And yet the company has a standard of acknowledging their staff or their employees like this. So what do you think about individualizing that or profiling the team or the department? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's certain universal concepts that work, right? With appreciation. And what I mean by that is making sure it's specific and then results oriented versus somebody saying, thanks. Hey, I appreciate people. I just tell them thanks. Yeah, but that's not really sincere.
It almost like it feels like a brush off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is saying to somebody, hey, thanks for helping me out with that report last week. As a result, we sent it to the customer and they loved it. I really appreciate that. Then it's specific and results oriented. So I think there's a lot of things to kind of uncover when people say, oh, appreciation may not work. Well, how sincere and what are we doing about that? But that's one thing. The bigger point that we have to look at as a whole is how we are operating, I think, as leaders as a whole. And really, are we using these strategies on ourselves first? And then how accessible are we making it to other people? And then to your point, are we individualizing versus grouping? And here's what I mean is, I'm really against labeling. It doesn't mean that there's a lot of stuff out there where the people take personality tests. That's all useful to learn about ourselves and to be aware that how we might be different as well as how other people are different. But where I cross over into, I think it's harmful, is when then we take it and we think we're psychologists or psychiatrists and we start to snapshot people. People are not so simple. So I'm
Yeah.
against, I mean, the obvious stuff like gender stuff, age stuff, all that kind of stuff. But the reason why I'm so against all these labelings is because then people start to think that they know somebody, and human beings are much more complex and they're so different. What
Yeah.
makes you different, what makes me different, is a complex set of things that might even go from our genes, but definitely from our upbringing and how we were parenting and stuff like this. I'm not trying to make this all super complicated. I'm just saying, why not treat people as if you don't know them and get to
Yeah.
know them and work with them the way they would like to be worked with, producing the results that need to get produced.
Really approaching with humility and curiosity
Yeah.
versus like, great that you have this profile or you've understood some things about them based on their background or their disc test or whatever it is,
Yeah.
but you are doing yourself and them the courtesy of staying humble and staying curious to keep discovering, because like it or not, even if they have some sort of personality profile, change the context and they're a different person. Change their life circumstances and they've changed as well. Grow a few years or a decade and they're a different person again. So that's for each person to do ourselves and somebody else the honor of going, interesting. Don't pre-decide, but rather keep learning, keep finding out, it sounds like is what you're saying.
Yes, because I believe sometimes people oversimplify and they've lost compassion. Here's an example that I think really builds from what you're saying. When people say, well, that person micromanages, they're an awful person. Well, okay, so let's say that assessment is correct. The bigger question is, why are they operating that way? And what about approaching them from understanding why and maybe what could be done differently? And when I talk about compassion, what I mean by that is we've all micromanaged. I'll say to people, there's not a person I've ever met that's not micromanaged at some time in their life. So let's look at why sometimes people micromanage. And quite often it's fear. Fear something's not going to get done. Now, am I saying that's a good management strategy to do every day and all the time? Of course not. But let's look at this as to why that's happening. It deals with really looking at this whole individual aspect and understanding people. So often somebody will call me and say, this person is doing this. What do you think I should do? I'll say, well, have you asked them why they're doing it? And, probe, find the root cause. We can't fix something unless we become aware of what the root cause is. And we become so often, we want to have these snap judgments. Just think about it this way. How often have you heard that people who are reading books and say, well, that person's a passive aggressive or they're a narcissist? And you know what I said this to a friend of mine the other day. I'm just like, oh, that person's a narcissist. I'm like, are you a psychiatrist? No, but I've read things. And that person clearly is she had some terminology around narcissism and whatever. I'm like, could be, but I'm not trained exactly in that way. And neither are you. So rather than just have that assessment, why don't you go find out what they're doing and why they're doing it and see if you can work better with them. And bottom line is start to ask them, inquire. And I love what you said earlier. Be curious. That's such a great trait to have.
It's interesting as humans how quick we are to judge on behaviors we don't like without to turn in the mirror and going, hey, has there been a time I've done that? Every single narcissistic behavior, I'm sure every human has done, whether they're a narcissist or not, when we look at that, and then we as humans love to, simplification really helps us when we're lost for an answer,
Yeah.
but we often fall into the trap of creating a label when we do it. Instead of looking at the why that you're looking for discovering, we just provide the label before we've discovered the why. We can still simplify it. It's a much cleaner and simpler answer once we discover what their truth is, but we like to skip those steps and just pre-decide without knowing. And then we've labeled them the micromanager or the rude person. And that's our version of making it easy on our own brains, easy on ourselves. Some of these very human traits tend to come from our overwhelming or overstressed schedules or lives. And then we have this physiological response that says, okay, shut down that prefrontal cortex. Let's ramp up our amygdala, our limbic system. And then we're not really working between the two. We're not really online. We're more emotional. We're more reactive. We're less empathetic. We're less able to learn. What are your thoughts on that? How do you support companies or leaders in this environment that's just gotten busier and busier and more scheduled, and the humans that are trying to deal with it all are finding themselves overwhelmed or really stressed, and that doesn't put them in a space to be able to operate in some of these kind of high functioning ideal ways that you're describing?
Wow, there's a lot to unpack out of what you shared. One of the things it reminds me, we just completed a national study on consistently high achieving teams. And anybody that wants to study, it's original research. We did it in conjunction with a research company, but we led it. They're welcome to it. But one of the things we found out is I think it's 37% of companies don't have any policy to manage interruptions. It's a big deal. So if I'm constantly being interrupted and if I'm interrupting other people, which I have done, as my assistant will say, but I mean, if we don't address this and try to deal with this, then our meetings go on longer. People are not really focused and they're not doing great work versus teaching them not just time management skills, but how about dealing with interruptions? So here's an easy example. You're in a meeting and you see people texting under the table or just texting outright and or on their computer. Nobody manages this. And here's the thing, human beings can only do one thing consciously at a time. We cannot do two things consciously at a time. It's just one. Now we can do other things subconsciously, but here's the thing, if I'm texting, I'm not listening. I cannot do two things at one time. So we don't manage this, and then these things really cause us to react and cause other people to miss things. And I've seen meetings go on a lot longer. I'll give you a real quick example. I was hired a while back to watch a team operate. And the leader of this billion-dollar business he was talking to his team. It was his leadership team. And the head of BD had not just one phone on the desk, but two phones and was actually using both at different times texting. So I said to the leader afterwards, I said, why didn't you say something? And he said, well, I don't want to bother him. And maybe it's really important. I'll say, well, maybe it is. But the message that you allowed to be sent in that meeting was you don't really have to, nobody has to really listen to you and nobody has to listen to really each other because they're doing their own thing. And he had never thought about it. So we have to, as leaders, manage disruptions and interruptions and figure out what we're going to do about this to keep people focused.
Yes, that's really, really powerful. It's interesting that the way you're describing that, I am sure that anyone listening can go ding, ding, ding. And what I'm thinking, and this is a great example of it because I'm leading a podcast here, I have to be listening and thinking of the next thing at the same time. What I'm thinking is that that's so much easier to do when you first step into an interaction. So for instance, if I first start working with an individual or a company, I set some ground rules. It's so easy to say, I have an expectation that we're working together and I'm communicating with you that you don't have the distraction of a phone in front of you, or it's flipped over, it's away, or it's not in this meeting. And then it's easy to set those initial ground rules. What do you do when you've got a company that's been working together for sometimes some people a decade, and they've had these kind of habits, these insidious habits that have come in, and it's just kind of normal for them? How would you approach resetting some of these standards?
So what I would do is get the unsaid said and bring this up, talk about it. And they're welcome to our research. Again, the national study, we'll send that to them. The white paper on this, it's actually a report. We'll send it to them. They can use it as a topic of conversation. That's what they can do also. And talk about it, because I've taught this many times to leadership teams. And what I've come to realize over the years is they have forgotten this. And some people actually don't know this. And they don't know, or maybe never clearly thought, that they can only do one thing consciously at a time. So I think awareness and compassion, and then setting the standard moving forward. And so what do I do when I'm with the leadership team? I'm like, please put the phone away off the table. Or if you have to have it on there, put it on vibrate, and please don't look at this unless it's a work or family emergency. And if there is one, we'll stop the session. And that significantly reduces the interruptions. And in fairness to other people, nobody really has talked about that. So if that's happened, get the unsaid said, correct it, and move it forward. That's what great leadership is about. Sometimes we have to say things that may be unpopular in the moment, but are actually important for people to hear. Take a stand and move forward. And as leaders, we need to set the example and set the example with others.
I love this. This is so powerful. And it's a great reminder for people to step back into some of the things that I call it leaning on structure, some of the structures that need to be there so that you don't have to be thinking and distracted by those things because the structure's there. It's the system that just you lean on that when well, this is our policy on it. This is our system on this. This is what supports us to be able to go forward as our best. And we all agreed on this or decided it together. And then that ends up really powerful. I love that. So I want to really pop into something that you've already told me about behind the scenes. And it's called, and you've already pointed to some of the great resources that you have, whether it's research or resources and training that you've described. And this other thing called chat. You've developed this system, and it's a consistently high achieving team online system. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Thank you for bringing this up too, because I'm very passionate about this. And so bottom line is it's an online system, how to make teams great, that's accessible to everyone in a very cost-effective way. Let me kind of now, having said that's the main headline, let me kind of give a little bit of background and what might be interesting for people. When we talk about consistently high achieving team, I'm on purpose using that terminology versus high performing team. The problem with the word performing is it can be confused with hard work versus achieving is about producing results, which is very important in today's work world because quite often we push on people and say, hey, can you do this? And they go, well, what do you want me to do? I'm working hard. And a great response is, I'm not questioning your work ethic. It's about producing results. And if we have less resources or there's a lot of uncertainty in the marketplace or whatever the case may be, we need to constantly be evolving and growing and changing things. So let's look at what's producing results, what's not, and actually fix that so that we are more focused on results or, said differently, achievement. The other is about doing it consistently because we can burn people out by pushing people, accomplishing a goal, but how do we consistently have high achievement? So consistently high achieving team is the critical part. So we've developed an online system that makes it accessible to everybody. And so we can, if they're interested in that, please send us, they can contact us at stevengaffney.com, or actually, let me make it real simple, justbehonest.com. In fact, let me just say this, even aside from this, if they cite something that they learned from this podcast, I want them to email us, go to justbehonest.com, and we'll send them the very first book I wrote called Just Be Honest, which goes through the most important distinction in having a difficult conversation with anyone. So we'll send them the electronic version of that book for free if they just send us what they've done as a result of listening to the show. So just go on justbehonest.com, and we can also send them some information also about how they can easily get on the chat system.
This is so cool. So I love this. So at justbehonest.com, you can pop in the nugget that you learned about what we've talked about, and then you'll send them the online book, the digital version of the book, and any other little nuggets that that they can have along the way. I love that. I love that. I love that. Okay, so that's exciting. Now, on your chat system, it's a customized thing. It's something that's really going to help people yield those outcomes that they've been working towards with support. And clearly, I'm going to make an assumption here. I like to operate in agreements, not assumptions, but I'm going to make the assumption here that a lot of it is coming from these concepts, these pillars, these teachings that you have been talking about so far, so that it makes it more easily applied for somebody in their organization. Is that, am I making a leap there, or is that pretty solid?
It's a perfect leap. In fact, it touches on an aspect I forgot to bring up, which is it's all AI generated with an AI overlay. And what's different about a lot of other systems versus this is instead of trying to figure out, so do I want to get the unsaid said, or consistent communication business rhythm, or he's talked about a lot of different deep listening, what do I do? All you need to do is you go to our system and you type in, I'm leading a team and we're not collaborating well, and there's a lot of uncertainty. What do I do? The AI answers it specifically, and it's a closed private system. It does not hallucinate, and it's only based on our content. And so you ask it, it tells you specifically what to do, and then cites which videos to watch with your team. And you can watch it with other people or even at home. So it's answering the question, and then there's certain videos that are teaching videos on some of the core concepts. So an example would be, how do you get the unsaid said? We went through some of the strategies today. There are other ones as well, but it's all AI generated or an AI overlay over the whole system, which makes it incredibly easy that anybody can use instantly.
You know what I love about this, and this has been so challenging for people who are consultants or coaches or run their own businesses, is that it's taking you and being able to do what you'd be able to do in person, which is go, hey, I can give you this answer right now, and I can reference you to more materials that will support you in learning this further or with more examples. But without you having to do it, really magnifying your reach, magnifying your impact without having the cost, if you're looking at a company, without the cost of you being in person with someone. Now, this is the kind of thing that, you've spoken about generative AI and an AI overlay. This is the kind of thing that some employees and maybe higher management are worried about, and they're fearful around AI. What would be your thoughts or any messaging that you'd like to share on your thoughts on people's fear of AI?
I don't really understand the fear of AI. The only fear that often people cite is losing the job. And here's the way I would say this. You have to embrace it. And our industry needs to embrace it. So the day and age where, wow, I got to get on the phone with the person and coach them. There's definitely people that want that and will always want that. And I might want that. You might want this. But here's the thing. My goal in life is to make this content accessible to everyone in the world. The reason is because the most challenging part that people have in their life when they really think about it is relationships. And it always comes down to people. For example, even when people say in the company, well, it's our process. It's not the people. It's the process that's broken. My comeback is, who's in charge of the process? And why aren't they changing it? So when we really look at things and I get people talking, it always comes down to people problems. And so it really is about embracing these technology, embracing AI, because what it does is it makes learning so much easier. I'll give you an easy example. There's a lot of online stuff that's been developed, obviously. And the problem with if you don't use AI, you have to sit there and search and, okay, I got to learn this module and this module. But now you just ask AI. In a private system like ours, what do I do? It prioritizes and tells you exactly what to do and then cites which videos to watch, which makes learning so much easier. And we
Yes.
have books in there. So another example might be where somebody says, well, I got to read all these books. Well, you could, would love it, or you just ask all AI or an AI that is or a private one based on certain books, and it can summarize books. So the learning is so much faster and accessible to everyone. So I say that we need to do one thing primarily, embrace it.
Mhm. I love that. I love that. And it supports one of the messages that I've been saying, which is that if you happen to be one of those people afraid of AI, then learn about AI. You're indispensable. You're someone who in your field or your role, if you can utilize AI and whatever your role is, I don't care what role it is, you are going to make yourself indispensable in that particular role because you're going with and embracing what is happening inevitably right now, really powerfully. Okay, I am just blown away by some of the amazing shares, nuggets, teachings that you've been giving us. I've asked a little question here. What's not in your bio? What is something that you can share with us about yourselves that people might be surprised to know? They might go, "Oh, really?" Because there's certain messaging that gets sent when we're in this professional environment
Yeah.
and on a podcast. But what about you? What's the you behind the scenes that most people don't know from the professional version of you?
Probably there's many that I'm thinking some inconsequential, but I think what's the most relevant that's not always in the bio or many people don't realize is I'm a product of this industry. So I didn't grow up optimistic. It's not like I was like, oh yeah, there's always things. And I was not a great communicator. In fact, people can read about my bio, but I had a difficult time. I was socially awkward. I was bullied, all kinds of stuff, but it didn't come naturally. And I actually had a really bad attitude. So then I discovered personal development, And it opened my eyes to all kinds of things, and I learned so much. Then I built things from what I learned into a lot of this. But the other thing that people don't often realize is the content that I developed was for me first. So how
Yeah.
I developed how to have a difficult conversation is because I was always upfront and honest, but it didn't always go well. And then I studied why some conversations go well and what to do differently. And that's how I developed the 9-step formula. And so a lot of things, even the latest book, Unconditional Power, which I have, is that about when we're in a good mood, we're smarter. And how do we develop being in a good mood and get other people to be in a better mood? And I mean, morale and mindset. So when you talk about mood, morale, mindset, similar ideas. What do? It's because I've suffered from moods. It's not like I was clinically depressed, but I would get sad and still get sad. But I noticed how some people bounce back really fast, and I was slow to bounce back. And then I started to study, why do those people bounce back faster? So there's 9 strategies in there for it as well. But they're all strategies I wanted to learn because I was trying to improve myself. So I'm a product of this, and there's nothing I don't teach that I don't personally use. It's not that I'm perfect at all, but I use this, and I first use it on myself, and that's how I developed it. And that's one thing that's not often clear in the bio, but I think it's important and people hopefully might find interesting.
Yeah, I thank you for sharing that, first of all, because I really think that so many people don't realize that they're doing the do as I say, not as I do kind of scenario versus really making the effort to practice the skill and being an example of what's possible with a skill, like being honest, like communicating and listening in ways that really are beneficial. So I really appreciate that share. We always like to ask one piece of advice. This could be a piece of advice that you would give your younger self. It could be a piece of advice that you would give someone who was up and coming or a new leader. What would be that piece of advice that you'd like to share?
Great question. Probably the thing I would say to my younger self is, don't be so hard on yourself. I've always been harder on myself than anybody else has been on me. And it's just how it is. And so when I make a mistake, I tend to be very unforgiving. So that's another strategy I've learned, is how to be forgiving of yourself and then, of course, of other people. Um, so probably when I look back, is just don't be so hard on yourself. Enjoy your life more, because I've been really tough on myself when I make mistakes. Like, how could that happen? But again, I've studied and learned things on how to bounce back and move out of it. So one thing I've learned that has really helped me is when I am hard on myself, because that's kind of my knee-jerk reaction, is, okay, what lessons am I learning from this situation that will help me improve my life? Instead, it is what it is. So what am I going to take from that experience? So that's one thing that's helped. Another thing that's helped is about the value of appreciating myself, but also others. And so there's many things I've learned, but I think my older self now would like to tell my younger self, don't be so hard on yourself, learn from your mistakes, and enjoy your life.
I love that. I love that. I really think that people in leadership roles are people that are very, very hard on themselves in general. And I think that message, hearing it from someone who, like you, who's clearly emphasized that heart-led leadership, the honesty, the really considering other people and connecting with other people, is a powerful message. So thank you for sharing that. I love that. I would like people to have that opportunity to reach out to you at stevengaffney.com, justbehonest.com. You are on LinkedIn. You are on Instagram. Instagram is Steven Gaffney DC. LinkedIn is Steven Gaffney Company. And that's where people can find you. And I am just extremely grateful that you've been able to come on with us and share all these wonderful bits of nuggets, like gold. This is gold, people. I love it. I love it. So thank you so much, Steven. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you so much for asking fantastic questions. And I really, really appreciate the dialogue too. So thank you for having me on your show.
It's been a pleasure.